The little girl was balancing on a single metal crutch when she asked the question that would change 3 broken hearts forever. The cafe was loud with evening chatter, the smell of roasted coffee beans thick in the air, but her soft voice somehow cut through everything. She stood beside a small corner table where a widowed father and his 7-year-old daughter sat in silence, their grief like an invisible third chair between them. She looked up at them with wide, steady eyes and asked if she could share the table. No one in that cafe knew that the answer waiting in that moment would begin a quiet miracle. Before we step into their story, pause for just a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that even the smallest act of compassion can rewrite someone's future, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment about what kindness means to you, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that the world is still full of light. Armand had not wanted to leave the house that evening. It had been 11 months since his wife died in a late-night accident on a rain-slicked highway, and every day since then had felt like walking through thick fog. He functioned because he had to. He worked because bills did not pause for heartbreak. He smiled because his daughter, Meher, still believed fathers were supposed to be strong, but inside, he was exhausted in ways sleep could not fix. The cafe had once been a place of laughter for their family. It was where his wife used to insist on Sunday hot chocolate, where she would take photographs of Meher's chocolate mustache and pretend to scold Armand for stealing fries. After the accident, he avoided it. The memories were too loud. But that evening, Meher had asked if they could go somewhere not sad. She had said it quietly, almost apologetically, as if asking for joy was a burden, and so Armand brought her there, hoping neutral ground might soften the ache. They sat at a small round table near the window. Outside, the sky was turning deep orange. Inside, Armand stared at his untouched coffee while Meher pushed a fork through a slice of cake she barely tasted. The distance between them felt unfair. He loved her more than anything in the world, yet grief had made him quiet, withdrawn. Sometimes he caught her watching him, as if trying to measure how much of her father was still there. Then the girl with the crutch approached. She looked around 10 years old. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore a faded yellow dress. One pant leg was neatly pinned just above where her knee would have been. The metal of her crutch was scratched and worn, as if it had traveled many miles with her. She carried no tray, no food, only a hopeful expression and a small paper bag. The cafe was nearly full. A few people glanced at her, and then quickly looked away. Armand felt a familiar discomfort rise in his chest, the kind that comes from witnessing quiet injustice but not knowing how to fix it. He expected the staff to intervene. They didn't. When she asked to share the table, Armand hesitated. He wasn't unkind, but he was tired of unexpected moments, tired of feeling exposed, tired of conversations he didn't have the energy for. For a second, he considered saying they were about to leave. Before he could respond, Meher looked up at the girl. There was a long pause, a pause heavy with adult hesitation and childhood honesty. Then Meher said something that neither Armand nor the girl would ever forget. She said that her mama used to say that tables are happier when they have more people around them. She said that empty chairs are the saddest things in the world, and that no one should eat alone if there is space. She said it gently, as if reciting something sacred. Armand felt something crack open inside him. The girl's face changed. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a window opening in a stuffy room. She nodded and carefully settled herself into the empty chair. The paper bag she carried held a small sandwich and an apple. She placed them neatly in front of her, as if she were afraid of taking up too much space. Her name was Hira. She did not speak much at first. She listened. She watched. Meher, on the other hand, began asking questions in the effortless way children do. She asked about the crutch, about the braid, about the apple. There was no pity in her voice, only curiosity. Hira explained that she had lost her leg 2 years earlier in an accident involving a bus. She said it plainly, without dramatics. She told them she lived with her grandmother nearby and sometimes came to the cafe because it was warm and smelled like cinnamon. She didn't always buy something, but she liked sitting near the window. Armand noticed the manager glancing at their table, then looking away again. It struck him that perhaps Hira had been turned away before, Perhaps she had learned to ask quietly, ready to retreat if necessary. As the minutes passed, something shifted. Meher began sharing stories about her mother, about how she used to sing loudly while cooking, about how she believed that rain meant the sky was washing its face. Arman stiffened at first, worried that speaking of her would reopen wounds. But instead, the air at the table grew warmer. Hira listened with full attention. She said that her mother used to hum while sewing, and that sometimes she could still hear the tune in her head at night. Arman realized then that this little girl carried her own absence. Grief recognized grief. For the first time in months, Arman found himself speaking about his wife without choking on the words. He described her laugh. He described the way she would squeeze his hand twice when she was proud of him. Meher smiled in a way he hadn't seen in weeks. The cafe around them faded. Later, when Hira finished her sandwich, she carefully folded the paper bag and tucked it away. Arman asked if she came here often. She nodded. He hesitated again, then did something that felt both small and enormous. He ordered another slice of cake and placed it in front of her. She looked startled, then grateful. It was a simple dessert, but it felt like an offering of belonging. In the weeks that followed, the three of them began meeting at the cafe every Friday evening. It wasn't planned at first. It just happened. Meher would ask if they could see Hira. Arman would pretend it was coincidence, but he found himself arriving at the same time each week. Hira's grandmother eventually joined them one evening, her eyes cautious but kind. She thanked Arman for the company he and Meher had offered. She explained that since the accident, Hira had struggled with feeling less than. Other children sometimes stared, some whispered. The world, she said softly, is not always gentle with those who move differently. Arman understood that sentence more than she knew. The world had not been gentle with him either. One evening, as rain tapped against the cafe windows, Hira arrived looking troubled. She had been told she could not participate in a school race. The teacher had suggested she sit this one out. She tried to say it didn't matter, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Meher's eyes filled with fierce indignation. She declared that races were about hearts, not legs. Arman felt pride swell in his chest. He had worried that grief might harden his daughter. Instead, it had deepened her compassion. That night, Arman went home and could not stop thinking about Hira's words. He remembered how his wife used to volunteer at community events, how she believed that change began with ordinary people refusing to look away. The following week he visited Hira's school. It was not an easy conversation. Policies were cited. Safety concerns were mentioned. But Arman persisted. He proposed alternatives, adjustments, inclusive activities. He spoke not as a hero, but as a father who understood what exclusion feels like. Eventually, the school agreed to create a modified race category and inclusive games for all students. The day of the event was bright and windy. Parents gathered along the field. Children lined up at the starting line. Hira stood with her crutch, nervous but determined. Meher stood beside her, holding her hand until the whistle blew. When the race began, something extraordinary happened. Several children who could have sprinted ahead chose to slow down. They matched Hira's pace. They laughed. They cheered. It wasn't about who finished first. It was about crossing together. Arman stood at the edge of the field, tears blurring his vision. He felt his wife's presence in the sunlight, in the laughter, in the courage of two little girls who refused to accept small definitions of worth. That evening, back at the cafe, Hira was glowing. Not because she had won, but because she had belonged. Months passed. The Friday meetings became tradition. The cafe staff began greeting Hira by name. The manager who once looked away now ensured a table was always available. Grief did not disappear from Arman's life. He still missed his wife every single day. There were still nights when the house felt unbearably quiet, but the heaviness had shifted. It was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. He began volunteering at the school regularly. He started a small community group focused on accessibility and inclusion. It wasn't grand, it wasn't famous, but it mattered. Meher grew brighter. She laughed more. She spoke about her mother without sadness swallowing her whole. And Hira stood taller, even with one leg, than many who walked on two. One evening, nearly a year after that first question in the cafe, Hira arrived with something wrapped in newspaper. She handed it to Arman and Meher shyly. Inside was a small hand-sewn cushion. On it, carefully stitched in uneven but determined letters, were the words, "No one eats alone." Arman felt his throat tighten. He realized that night that healing does not always arrive in dramatic gestures. Sometimes it arrives on a crutch, carrying a paper bag, asking for space at your table. And sometimes, the bravest reply comes from a child who remembers her mother's wisdom. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something from the heart. If this journey of Arman, Meher, and Hira has touched you even a little, if it reminded you of someone you've lost or someone you've helped, please engage with this video. Like it, share it, and tell us your thoughts. And just before we close, write in the comments, "No one eats alone." Let that be our quiet promise to the world. Because somewhere tonight there is a person standing beside a table wondering if they belong. And somewhere else there is a child brave enough to make room. Arman once believed his life had ended the night his wife's did. But he learned that love does not disappear. It transforms. It shows up in unexpected questions, in shared desserts, in races run side by side. The little girl with one leg did not just share a table that evening. She shared courage. She shared perspective. She shared a reminder that broken things are not useless things. And a widowed father, who thought he had nothing left to give, discovered that even in the middle of loss, his heart was still capable of building a home for someone else. Sometimes all it takes is an empty chair, and the willingness to fill it.